Hello everyone, both fans of Joss Whedon and specifically his best series Firefly, and also anyone who is perhaps a fan of my channel and has been waiting patiently for 2 weeks since my review of the third episode of the series Bushwhacked. I can only sincerely apologize for not putting up this review a week ago and offer my best explanation as to why I did not. The long and short of it is that my family and I went out of town for the weekend some 4 hours away, and this trip, no matter how it is done, is exhausting. And coming back home, I was busy for about half the week every night, and I was stressing about that, and so I was generally pretty light on content all around. But it seems there won't be any more out-of-town trips for a little while, and if there are, I will do my best to attempt to have those reviews of this series scheduled to upload before I exhaust myself on a trip going out of town. With all of that out of the way, it's now time to talk about the fourth episode of Firefly, titled Shindig. One thing I really enjoy about this series, and really any series, although it's specifically apparent in this series, is the mashing up of different genres. Many people go to the obvious, it's a western set in outer space, and sure it is, but there's more. This episode specifically features a duel over a lady's honor that I might expect to see in a Jane Austen story. The episode Out of Gas reads more like a World War II submarine movie, and less like a space western. The previous episode I talked about, Bushwhacked, kinda feels like a slasher movie with less on-screen carnage. The train job is kinda like a more high-tech heist movie in the vein of Ocean's 11. You get the point. This kind of practice is not only fun for the fans, but it's practical for the writers. If you set out to create a television series, if you are only working in the known tropes and ideas that exist within the Western genre, then there's only going to be so much you will feel like you can do before the well will run dry. But if you add heist stories, World War II submarine stories, and a touch of Jane Austen, then you'll find that it's much easier to tell stories because suddenly you've got the tools of 4 or 5 genres at your hands instead of just one genre. If you're running out of ideas, you can just grab a little bit of horror monster and a little bit of some other genre you've added, and boom, you have elements that make a story. Granted, any series can add disparate parts together to form something weird and unique, but it takes skilled writing from all of the people who worked on this show to make it feel seamless and real. I wanted to talk about this aspect of Firefly because I hadn't really touched on it yet, and I felt like now was as good of a time to do so as any. If you're a fan of this show, I encourage you to keep an eye out for any other kind of genre blending in this series. Moving on, let me quickly talk about the plot of this episode. Unlike the episode Bushwhacked, I feel like this episode does cover at least 3 characters and gives them each a specific character arc, whereas in Bushwhacked, I didn't especially think that any of the characters in the crew of the Serenity ship got an arc. In this episode, the crew stops by on Persephone, which is a world that is a little more higher class than what our characters are used to interacting with. Inara has a client who wants to take her as a date to a ball, and Mal is more or less kidnapped by his former colleague in crime, Badger. Badger, last time we saw him, was more or less an anus to Mal and would not help him in a deal that they had agreed upon. Now Badger wants Mal to go to this ball that Inara is going to and find a man who wants him to smuggle some property for him off-world. Mal takes Kaylee to the ball, who, if you've seen this episode, you know that Mal insulted her earlier when she said that she would love to have a pretty dress that she was looking at in a store window. Mal quickly gets into a skirmish with Inara's date, and thus they will be having a duel in the foremost sword fight. The episode ends with Mal winning the duel, and the man who Mal is supposed to make a deal with is inclined to let Mal smuggle the property off-world, which we then see is a herd of cattle. Let me talk about each character who gets a character arc here. First, let's talk about Mal. Once again, we see that Mal is more or less a synthesis of each person on the ship. When Mal is with Jane talking to Badger, I can totally see a certain kind of friendship here. They're both essentially scallywags, but there are times when Mal exudes Kaylee's optimism, or Wash's sense of humor. That's all very evident here, and I won't go into it here like I did in my review of the pilot episode. In this episode, we get more or less an entire episode to showcase Mal and Inara's relationship, which we see is fairly complicated. They're both from entirely different worlds, and yet they have a chemistry with each other that's hard to believe is just 2 actors playing parts for a TV show. we see that Mal essentially has to choose between his life of villainy and being a rogue, or a life where he would very likely have to abandon all of that in exchange for love and life with Inara. He knows that he has a thing for her, and she knows that she has a thing for him, and they both know that the other one knows. Mal comes right out and asks Inara not to leave with the man who Mal will be dueling with, but he quickly saves it by saying that he doesn't care for people who kill him. Yeah, right, and having feelings for her has nothing to do with it, I bet. Meanwhile, Inara has to make a similar choice between life on Serenity, where life will always be dirtier than what she's born and raised into, or if she wants to leave this life for what is more civilized. The man who Mal will be dueling with has offered Inara a permanent life on Persephone as his permanent companion. At the end of the day, Inara makes her choice to keep living in Serenity and surrounding herself with the lifestyle of a band of thieves. And Mal, I guess you could say his choice is made for him. He gets to stay as a thief and he doesn't have to abandon anything because the lady that he loves will be sticking around. So even though Mal's arc is sort of non-existent, it's still nice to see that he can live in Inara's world if he puts some effort into it. And I guess you could also say that he has an arc in that he doesn't exactly go full-on rogue when he's fighting with the guy who Inara was dating. He sort of kinda finds a happy medium between being the roguish villain and being a high-class man of honor that would exist on Persephone in this kind of lifestyle. And lastly, we get a sorta small arc with Kaylee. We see that just because she's comfortable being the engineer and not brushing her hair or washing her face, doesn't mean that she doesn't like some of the finer things in life. I certainly don't want to sound sexist by suggesting that women like pink things and dresses and dances, and boys like trucks and blue things and sports or whatever, but at least some of this is in the episode, so I'll go ahead and go there. What most people in modern society think of as air quotes girly things, Kaylee still likes some of those things, even if she acts more or less like an air quotes tomboy. That's essentially her arc in this episode. She gets to indulge in a hidden side that she doesn't usually get to let out very often because usually there's not really an opportunity for it. So that's a nice little arc for her in this episode. Overall, I don't feel like I have much more to say about this episode. It's a very solid episode, but I just don't have a great deal to say like I have in previous episodes. This episode does have some absolutely amazing lines of dialogue. Jane and Mal have some great moments when they are talking to Badger, and Zoe even gets in a line that had me laughing for about 2 minutes longer than it was probably intended. But at the end of the day, I suspect the reason I have less to say here than in some episodes is that this episode really focuses heavily on the relationship between Mal and Inara. And sadly, this is one story that doesn't really go anywhere in this series, since it ended prematurely. If the series had gone on longer, or Mal and Inara's relationship had become a tad more romantic maybe earlier on, I might have more to say about these two. But sadly, any episode that really hits us with a lot of Malnara, wow, that sounds like a sickness. Any episode that really hits us with these two kind of giving each other a lot of sexy looks is going to feel like setup for a payoff that we never get, unfortunately. In any case, I liked this episode and I found it to be very good. There's really nothing else to say, I don't think. Anyhow, I will definitely be putting up a review of the next episode next week, so I hope you will come back to see what I have to say roughly 1 week from today. Until then, I hope you guys will come back later this week to see some of my other videos, and I will see you guys then. Have a good day.